Hi, I'm Sandra Engerman, and we've been getting so much feedback that you love the Shaman's Cave. So hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel, and then we can make the work more accessible to so many more people.
I know it's so exciting that we're in many, many thousands of people after a short time. And and if you really like it and you want to be notified, there's a notification button too that you push and it tells you that you'll get notified every time we have a new show. And just in case you don't know who I am Renee Barabo, and I'm known as the Practical Shaman. And today we're going to cover a really practical issue. And I know we've covered it a long time ago, but it's back up for us all. So we thought we would talk about collective grief and motivation. Motivation, because we started talking about how when we get wallowing in this grief, and sometimes we can't even know that we're treading this murky waters, a good sign of that is a loss of motivation.
Yeah, and we also talked about that another topic that goes into this that we're going to try to weave in is surrender. Because as Renee was saying to me, part of working with grief is surrendering to your grief at the same time. And, you know, in our culture, we have this thing about feeling bad. Number one, we fear death more than anything. The ego does. Our spirit and our soul knows that it's eternal and immortal, but our ego is always freaking out. And so we do everything to push away the topic of death. And death is up right now all over the world. You really you have to work at trying not to deal with your feelings about death right now. And then there's the grief of people who lost loved ones in recent disasters, not just the COVID, but you know, we're in a cycle where different events are causing huge amounts of death. And so we're moving into our own personal grief of the grief of our own losses, what we've lost in our own lives, but also the massive grief of watching people die and lose their homes and lose their jobs and the homelessness and children without any food whatsoever. You know, this is bringing us into a lot of grief. And it's really important to learn how to work with grief so that you're dealing with your emotions and you're not running away from them. We don't deal with grief very well in this culture. Um, and you need to deal with it, but you also need to learn how to move forward in your life at the same time.
I love the Jewish tradition of sitting Shiva because at they have food because in that tradition that the breaking of the bread with other people is because we eat because life goes on and we can get so caught up in like you just read it if you're scrolling and I suggest people don't scroll, but it's just I just lost this one and I lost that one and then my cat died and it seems like Facebook and those other social media thrive on maybe that's what people are interested in is other people's loss and other people's grief, but at some point it becomes uh, over consuming. I went to lunch the other day with somebody and it was a business lunch and I'm sitting there, I'm an empath, and I could feel her grief was palatable. Like I was eating my turkey sandwich and eating her grief. And I was like, honey, what are you, how can I help? How can I help you here? And, we talked about like, my old saying that I use a lot is when you eat an elephant, you start one bite at a time. You empty out one small drawer at a time of your own, unpack your grief that way. You don't like, let me wallow it in and take it on, because it can almost be the quicksand that swallows us if we don't find, a vine to get out of that. And I think that for me, sometimes it's hard to discern, is this my grief? Is this your grief? Is this the collective grief of, I mean, we've got a lot to grieve this year. 2020 didn't go as we thought it was going to go.
No, it really hasn't. I remember I actually wrote an article for I used to be a blogger for the Huffington Post, and I've shared this story. They threw me off when I wrote about omens, but I was a blogger for about a year. And and I wrote about grief because I had gone to the bank and I was sitting with this banker and he burst out in tears. Well, and I'm trying to get him to do a bank transfer for me. And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I just lost my mom." And I said, "What are you doing here? You
Mhm.
need to be home. You need to be dealing with your grief." And he said, we're allowed, I think, 24 hours off of work for a funeral, and that's it. Um, so grief grief is a natural process. I'm really lucky, and I live out a little bit in the country, not really far out, but I'm in the trees, and so we do get quite a few animals. And to watch a squirrel grieve, I have, in my 25 years of living in this house, I've had to watch mother squirrels come out of their hole when a raven took their baby. And the 10 hours of listening to their wails of grief is unbelievable. I had a bird outside my door that was grieving for over 3 days, didn't stop for a second, went 24 hours just crying, crying, crying. I can tell you so many stories. I mean, it's unbelievable. Everything in nature grieves, and it's a natural process. It's part of, Renee and I have been talking endlessly in the time of the COVID. Dissolution is a natural process. You don't try to stop dissolution in the middle of dissolution. That's not natural. You have to let the process go through. And grief is like that. But it also you also go in a shock with grief. Don't you think that, Renee? Because I know that I watch myself and other people. It's almost like it takes a certain amount of time for your psyche to even integrate what just happened.
Absolutely. You reminded me of the time when, in fact, because it came up this week, I'm working with some dream work, and I was talking about, we're looking at a trail of a thread. And lo and behold, I realized I've been kind of burnt out for a while. But when I realized that, the job ended and I need to grieve it, but then I followed the thread of the burnout all the way back to my very first restaurant when I was 30. And I had my grand opening, and the very next day, my father had a massive stroke. 3 years later, almost to the day, or 3 years later, he died. And that was the only time I had planned off. So I was already on my way there because I planned 2 days away from my restaurant, of all things. And it happened the morning he died. I drove there in shock. I had to stop and pull over on the highway and take a nap. I got there, it was a whole family drama, because we always want death to be like some perfect thing. When our family drama escalates, doesn't de-escalate. And I went back to work on Friday, like the day after his funeral. And I'm standing there in my restaurant, numb, The very next morning, this people come in and they said, well, I'm really sorry about your dad, but let's get on to planning my daughter's wedding. And I sold my soul. In that moment, I sold my soul for some great big catering party. And what I realized this very past week is that's where the threads of my burnout stemmed from. You know, we're talking 30, almost 30 years ago. And here it is in this COVID time coming up again to say, like, wow, you know, I'm not kind if something happens to myself. I'm like, push on, push on, push on. And I think we tend to do that. Okay, well, that one died. We're so numb to that one died. Then there was all of those people over in Beirut who just got killed. It's just bombarding us that there's no space for us to feel.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know I've shared this. I took care of my parents the last 4 years of their life. And my dad died in 2011, and that was very traumatic for me. And my mom died in 2013, and that was very traumatic for me. They were 97 and 98, so they lived a very long life. But it's 2020, and first for I was teaching workshops when my parents died, but because I was taking care of them, I taught at a retreat center that was only 15 minutes away from where they were, so I could constantly go back and forth. So I was with them, but I still never really got to really sink into the level of what I witnessed and what happened. Um, and it's years later, and I'm still processing it. It's really interesting how, when I look at what are the things that are creating a disorder that I'm dealing with, what is it? It always comes up. I never finished grieving my parents' death. I mean, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and in this society, it's like, okay, let's move on. I remember in Chile once the Mapuche grandmother said, in Chile, when a woman loses her spouse, I don't know what do men do, but when the women loses their spouse, they wear black for a year so that they reminds themselves and it reminds others that they are in a grief space. Now, a year it tends to be a really good period of time to look at a grief cycle, just as like a COVID cycle or any this dissolution on a bigger year. But that a year when I quit drinking, I remember the first year I had to do everything sober for the first time again. So in a grief cycle, the same thing goes, is you have to experience every holiday, every anniversary, every birthday, and then, you know, in the Lakota, after the year, they have a ceremony. They have a party, a giveaway. I remember once making like the venison stew and the blueberry pudding. It was delicious for the elder who had passed, and it was just at about a year because it's time to remember. Now we move forward. So I don't know if 2021 is going to be a year where we're going to have to grieve for the whole year of what we lost in 2020, which in our minds, you know, are things.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's also important that everybody grieves differently. And, you know, we tend to judge people oftentimes for how they grieve instead of letting them go into their own natural process. And one of the things that Renee just said, which is really important, grief is actually, in shamanism, grief is an initiation. Because you have to be able to survive the change, the transition. Any transition that you survive, you had to go through some kind of initiation. And a big part of initiation that we don't understand initiation, period, in this culture. But one of the most important parts that I wrote about in Walking in Light, and I've been talking about recently in lectures that I'm doing, is how the community welcomes you back after initiation is almost as important as the initiation itself. So when Renee was telling the story of she walked in, to a restaurant and said, my father just died, and the woman said, well, we're planning a wedding. Um, Renee was not acknowledged for she's not the Renee Baribeau that this woman knew. She's
Hmm.
no longer, she's a different person. And to be welcomed back into the community with an acknowledgement of you just suffered an incredible loss. We're here for you. And we also honor that through this heartbreak, and I believe that grief breaks our hearts so that our hearts can expand more. That's how I see heartbreak, is heart expansion. You're now a different person who has gifts to contribute to everybody in our community. You've grown up, you've woken up to another evolution of yourself. And that is one of the most important parts of initiation, is being recognized that you're now a changed being. And we do not do that in this culture.
It's just maybe because I've set over a grief altar over here to work with this weekend, because, I just transitioned out of a job after almost 7 years. And, we just like, let's move on, like, okay, you got 3 weeks off. Now let's start something new. I mean, it's just how we go in this society we live in. Driving, driving, driving. What am I jumping into next? And it's like when I really followed that thread back to exhaustion, I'm there like, wow, did I ever recover that part of my soul that was left back there when that woman, like Sandra just said, did not honor me for that changed person that I was in that moment? And I guess I have more to look at today. I always, learn a lot here as we go too, because these aren't planned. We don't write them out. We don't know where we're necessarily going. But look at your own life this year and look at what plans did you have made? What spiritual adventures didn't you get to go on? And really look at, well, what were those connected to? How are those moving in my life right now? And a lot of us are not moving anywhere because we're afraid to go out.
Yeah.
We're being bombarded with fear instead of, this is a deep loss for our world, that we've lived this way and used up all of our resources, and now viruses are going to be on the wind that are going to keep us homebound.
Right.
That's pretty a significant shift.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my husband and I have been talking about, uh, you know, we've been looking at, because of my health, we've been looking at trying to go to places of beauty. And all of a sudden we might have just done our last one a year ago. And really kind of letting that sit in. But I'd like to give people a little tool to work with,
That's good.
that I think will be really helpful. I'm an empath. To everybody who's interested in shamanism is an empath. We don't exist. Non-empaths and shamanism don't exist. And so I lived a life of really significant depression and suicidal from my 13 into my 30s. And so when I decided I wanted to go back to school for psychology, I said, you can't look at what's become of you. And this has happened to you because you've taken on so many people's pain. I was always aware of where my depression and suicide was coming from. It wasn't I didn't have a bad childhood and I didn't have a bad life. I just sucked in. I think I watched that Twilight Zone where they talked about sin eaters and something happened to me that night. I've never been the same. And I just suck in whatever people have. And I said, you're crazy. You're going to back to school when you can't even read a newspaper because you can't handle the pain. So I came up with an exercise to do, and it's worked for me really well. And it's not a journey, it's just a timeout where you go inside and you look at the grief, you feel the grief, how much heartbreak are you feeling right now? And ask yourself, is it yours? Is this my grief? And if it is, then you're going to have to do some deep work around it. But if you get a message, is this somebody else's grief? Yes, it is. Then what I do is I say, thank you so much for giving me this information so I can have compassion for this other person. But this is not mine and it's hurting me, and I just let it go. And I've been doing that since the 1970s. And it really works. If it's mine, then we have to work. There's no escaping. You got to work it through. The only way out is through. With grief, the only way out is through. But if it's not yours, you need to honor your health and you need to honor your being and say, thank you very much for giving me this information, but it is not mine, and I let it go. Try it, and I think it's going to help you clear out a lot of what you're taking on from others and from the collective right now.
Absolutely. What I ended up telling the woman I was having lunch with is that your grief is like Velcro right now because it's unmanaged. And so everybody else's grief, which is so much out there right now, is like sticking to your Velcro. And, then it makes it even harder to pull out. So I love that idea of just in the moment, is this grief mine or is this not? Oh, it's not. Phew, thanks. And off with you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so speaking of the darker nights, your class starts this week.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited about it. I'm not a negative person. I can be.
Can't we all?
But when I'm in my higher self and I do my journeys and I work with my spirits, if you look, you can kind of see where we're going. Between illnesses and climate change and all of that. And there are going to be times when you're on your knees and you're praying for help and you're going, why aren't we getting the help? Why can't we magically turn this around? Where is God? Where is my spirits? I'm on my knees. I've lost faith. This is a territory in shamanism and in many different therapies and psychology called the dark night of the soul, where we have to walk through how our ego burdens us with so much that we worry about, that we carry pain about, that we should have let go at birth sometimes, and on and on. We're so covered up that we talk about being a light in the world, but how do you really shine your essential light when you're being so covered up with pain and suffering. And so I'm teaching a course where we do the initiation, and we're going to have people cheering us on. That's part of any initiation. And we're going to have people welcoming us back as changed people after the initiation. But we're going to go into a place of silence. That's the beautiful part of the dark night of the soul, is you can't hear all the noise. So you get to talk to your soul, and you get to talk to your spirit. You get to let go of all that's burdening you, so that you can finally actually get that the light of the Creator lives inside of you, and you get to shine a deeper level of light than you have when you were so covered up with pain. How does light shine through pain?
And I believe that starts, what days are you going to be teaching it?
It's starts on August 11th, but the Shift Network always gives you a few weeks to get into a course if you're hearing this later. And it's on Tuesday evenings. It's for me, Mountain Time at 6 o'clock at night, Mountain Time. That's all I know.
That's great. And I'm teaching a class this week too, called How to Whistle Up a Wind for Healing, and actually how to work with the wind whistle and the wind to loosen up, anything that's stuck like that on that Velcro, and move it along, like what Sandra was talking about. Is this mine? Is it not mine? And how do I actually move energy using the wind? So that's this Saturday. So you can join me, and there's links on our shamanstv.com for these, or in the Shaman's Cave. So check it both out, and we'd love to, see you continue and deepen your work, because Sandra and I just touched the topics. We don't go deep. Well, we do go deep, but we believe, both of us believe, that teachers are necessary. You can't get your education for free on the internet, because when one doesn't suit you, you're going to go over to the next free one. I call this the free culture. And so you need somebody who's going to call you on your shit. And that happens in a small group teaching situation. Some people might do it a little nicer, but, both of us are very direct. So join us. We'll see you next week. We got a really important topic next week. We're going to talk about commercializing shamanism, as we tell you about our new classes.
Blessings, everybody.